Welcome back. And this is going to be a very tricky subject to talk about, being somebody who's very inexperienced with emotions in a relationship that's supposed to be something that maybe has a goal of becoming a romantic relationship. But it's something I'm interested in kind of understanding together because if it's something new, then it's probably something that we can maybe revisit from any kind of perspective in life and maybe learn something new and maybe learn something from each other that worked in the past and try to integrate it into kind of like a personal context. So I was thinking about a movie that I watched and I really liked, and it's called 13 Going on 30, where if you haven't watched it, it's a girl who is probably 8 or 9, I think. And she and her friend, she actually has a best friend who's a boy, and she's having her birthday party. And what he did was he knew that she was somebody who liked fashion and who um, liked designing fashion. So he built her kind of like a mini house and showed kind of the different ways that she might be living in that house. And so this is what you kind of know about friends, is that they know all the things that you like that are personable to you, and they find thoughtful ways of gifting you something that would be meaningful to you in that regard. So it's almost to say, I know you would appreciate this because I know this about you. So then they find a way to kind of build on a hobby that you have. So this is something that you kind of learn um, as you build friendships, and friends kind of figure out how to know all the things that they like about each other, and then when they start to think about like, oh my gosh, I was at this store and I saw this and it reminded me of you, so I wanted to buy it for you. And then it just becomes like, oh, that's kind. And we call this thoughtfulness, which is it's a way of showing somebody that you care and that you want to bring joy to them, because that just brings you joy. And that's basically what friends are. So some of the things that when you are kind of growing up into a romantic relationship is that when you sometimes these relationships begin as a friendship, but then if you start to think about, well, maybe we want to spend time together outside of living in separate homes, then you have to wonder, do are we going to have the same kind of habits? Because sometimes if you're living apart and then living together, it's okay if some of the habits aren't the same, and it doesn't really matter. Like sometimes they'll just be like, oh, it's okay, I don't mind, giving up this habit for a little bit because I know I can go back to my old habits, and it's or my like my life living on my own, for example, or someone's house, and it'll be okay. So part of what I think an evolving relationship that's kind of like a personal and intimate one is knowing how to negotiate, how to sacrifice for somebody else. So what this means is, let's pretend that I have an idea of, if I want to spend time with somebody else, what's a habit that I really, really, really have that's meaningful for me that I never want to be able to worry about giving up? So the question then becomes, should I think about that habit being in the other person too? Or does it not have to be? And we just have to find a way to almost live with each other and respect each other's habits without saying that one person has to give it up entirely or the other person has to give it up entirely. And we have to almost find a way to find a middle way without anyone feeling like they're going to be sad because part of them has to almost die a little bit. So this is a very difficult question to try to understand how to answer, because even as we change by growing up and becoming adults and learning new things that we like, some of these habits change too. And some of the habits that we had when we were younger might not become habits anymore. We might just not want them anymore. So this is something that sometimes we do on purpose, and sometimes we don't realize that we kind of forgot about them and they're not really in our life anymore. And I don't know how to give any general example about this because each person is very different and how they understand their daily lives is going to be different. But I'm going to focus on this movie because I think it's something that we can all relate to, and it almost gives everybody an availability and like kind of the brain space to allow themselves to change and to move on and to maybe revisit the past and say, well, I don't think I have to see the past as a mistake. It's just something that I'm happy I went through because I learned what I learned. And then moving on, I think maybe I'll consider this, or I'll allow myself to think this way, where in the past maybe I didn't think I was allowed to think this way. So in this movie, this girl, she has a birthday party. I think I mentioned that. And because we know that sometimes people have wishes that come true, and they use almost their birthday as a time to maybe really, really focus their heart on an idea because they know that if the universe is really going to listen to me at any time, it's going to be on my birthday. So they make a really, really deep wish, and then maybe it comes true. So that's what happens in this movie. And she ends up making a wish. And I don't remember what the wish was. But anyway, she woke up and she was an adult woman. So she went from someone who was maybe 8 years old to someone who was maybe in her 20s or 30s. And she already had like a really big business and she was very popular and very stylish. And she almost looked like she had her life put together and she was just enjoying her life. But then when she woke up and she started to live this life, she was really confused. She was like, what just happened? And the first thing that came to mind was her best friend, that boy that had built her that kind of house. And so she went to his house. She went to work and she was like, I don't understand what's going on. And nothing made sense, obviously. So she's trying to kind of like put pieces together and try to remember like what. So she ends up going to this boy's house who's now an adult, and she's like, what happened? And he's like, we're not friends anymore. And so you can imagine what that would be like. Like imagine you were in that position where the first thing that comes to mind when you're trying to be almost resolving a problem is, oh, I know that one person that I can rely on and they're going to help me because we're best friends. And then you go there and then they're like, no, right? That's crushing. That's almost like, well, what other choices do I have? But in this movie, it ends up being that he's still a really nice guy and he's trying to help her understand like why somehow she doesn't remember what happened for like a lot of her life, like more than 20 years almost. Like it's a long time. So I think what ends up happening is that they go back to some of the friends that they both had when they were kids. And it ends up that she wanted to be friends with one of the popular girls who at the time was mean to both of them, that boy and the girl. But she ended up trying to be popular so that she could be her friend. And in doing that, that boy didn't want to be her friend anymore. So he was trying to be true to himself. And in doing that, I guess he decided that, well, if you want to be popular and that's more important to you than you being my friend, then maybe you should go and do that and I'll find like a different friend. So that's sometimes a very hard choice to make because sometimes it's not easy to know all the things that we like and what things are important for us at any given time. So that goes back to desire. Like, what is it that our heart really finds meaning in for us? And that's something that we learn with life and with growing older and trying new relationships and figuring out what our emotions are and why we have certain emotions and how we should respond to them. And with that, we'll be able to kind of, as we grow, understand, well, what kind of friends do I want to have then that are not going to almost pressure me to do something I might not be comfortable doing? Like what that boy was doing. He was like, okay, you know what? If I have to make this choice, I'm not going to make you be my friend. I'll just move on and you're welcome to move on too. So, anyway, the story goes on that he ends up helping her understand why she didn't even like her job. Like, even in her adult life, even though it looked like from the outside that she had all these clothes, she was very fashionable, but the way she was doing her job was sometimes mean to other people. And so she didn't remember herself as a kid being like that. So it was almost like all the meanness that she ended up living after her birthday wish, she almost didn't have in her mind anymore. And when she kind of went back into that life as an adult, as though that was what she wanted, she didn't want it. She was like, no, no, no. And she's trying to erase it all and get rid of it all. And then she ends up doing that. And then by the end of the movie, she ended up almost changing everything about her life to be a little bit more of a kinder person. And then she ended up remaining friends with that boy. And well, he was a man by then. But the girl that she wanted to be friends with, who was popular, they were friends before, like when she was still kind of not remembering that it's not nice to be mean. And they ended up not being very good friends anymore. So if you think of that, it's almost like saying, I'm glad that for her that she got to almost have a second chance at trying to understand what's really important in life. Because how do you know? Like sometimes people say, you only live once, which means try as many things as you can while you're growing up because that's what's going to give you almost the experience that you need to think about different ways to know how to choose and choose well so that you don't have a lot of regret in your life where you feel like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. And then you don't really know how to problem solve. And maybe you do lose friends on the way that you wish maybe you hadn't lost. So if we're thinking about how to understand, like maybe I'm a young boy who's going into high school and I'm 15 and maybe I took a year off for some reason. Like I just wanted to travel, or maybe my parents travel a lot. So I went to a different country and I went to a different school there. And I learned a lot about how to understand different emotions, mostly because I didn't understand the language. So I have to rely a lot on people who are almost wanting to help me, but they don't have the language to speak with me. So that we're just learning to play together and we're just learning to share. And eventually I learn a little bit of the language, they learn a little bit of my language. But you can see what brought the two together is kindness. It's just like, we don't want you to feel left out. We're happy that you're here. That's kind of what this whole like invitation into each other's life and this kind of communication is, even if they don't have the actual words. It's just like, be my friend and we'll be your friend and we'll show you around. And so you can understand how this kind of interaction is basically what we love as humans. We just love that kindness. And it also makes us happy if we're giving that kindness as well as if we're receiving it. So if you think about romantic relationships or relationships that kind of develop into something that two adults want to keep for a very long time, that's basically what they want to do, is they want to keep that kind of closeness together where they want to do things for each other. And sometimes that's what it'll end up being, that kind of sacrificing where you pick where we want to go out for dinner, or you pick where we go out to maybe go to the park and just relax and maybe go for a walk. So they want to almost take turns with deciding who's going to pick something to do. And then from that, they both feel like they don't have to sacrifice on something that they maybe really like doing, but the other person doesn't like doing it. So they're like, fine, never mind. Right? So when you try to wonder about how this can almost become something that parents worry about, it's usually around religion. And this is really tricky. This is where a lot of the problems tend to be, is that some parents want to wonder, well, if this boy or girl that you're wanting to be friends with, doesn't like to go to the temple, for example, is that going to be okay with you? So sometimes you have to think about that, because if you're someone who's trying to understand what the universe is doing and how to live an ethical life, and somebody else is thinking, yeah, I mean, that's important, but I don't really know how to think about that yet. So sometimes that's okay. You can just give them that space and you can try to understand, well, do you want to understand that together, or do you want to understand that by yourself? Or should I maybe just let you understand that and you can come and ask to be my friend later on? And those are very tricky questions to ask, because sometimes when people are wondering about these questions, if there are adults that are around who have thought about these questions a lot, they almost want to jump in and help right away. And that's okay, because sometimes it's good to give helpful ideas as you kind of go. And if you see somebody who's struggling with these questions, it's almost to say, I can give you some ideas if you want. But sometimes you don't really know if you should think about it by yourself first or if you should ask an adult. And because now we're getting older and we know how to go on the internet and look for answers to our questions, sometimes you just have to ask almost in your heart and then just hope that you'll be inspired in some way in a direction that helps you with your own strengths and your own skills to understand in a way that's going to actually answer your questions in a helpful way. So sometimes if you find, for example, some of your older friends, if you have older siblings where the parents are saying, no, you can't have this kind of friend, or no, these people think very differently than us and it's going to cause problems in our family. These are the kind of questions that you can start to wonder about, because it's true. You do know, like I know families where if the two families think about life and the universe in very different ways, it becomes very difficult for them to understand how to be friends together. If it's not just like the boy and the girl, for example, or the girl and the girl, or the boy and the boy, if they're okay together but the families try to understand each other, sometimes it creates problems and they can never really get along with each other well. There's a lot of movies that talk about this, that show how, I think this is regardless, like you'll always find that anyway, because if it's difficult to find two friends who find building a habit together very difficult. You can imagine if you're adding a lot of people, it just gets more and more complicated. And then, I mean, you have to kind of wonder, like, what is it that needs to be important? That we just all get along, or that we all believe the same thing? And like I said, when we kind of go back to like that family that I told you about, where the boy, or the couple who wanted that boy and to kind of hope that he does something beneficial in the world, you can understand where maybe as we grow more and more into a postmodern world where we don't always all have to believe in the same thing in the same way, then you can start to kind of relax those ideas almost and say, well, what is really important for us to all believe in? And then just wait there and just say, well, that's a good question. Because if we begin with kindness, it's almost to say, well, I want to respect your ideas and I want you to respect my ideas. And if we're not all living together, what ideas are really important for us to remember? Because it's usually when people live together that it becomes tricky. And sometimes when they have kids, they want to have ideas that are not always going to confuse the kids. So as you're growing up, you'll start to think about these questions more. As kids, sometimes these questions are not really questions that are talked about much, but people are almost afraid to ask them because they don't really know. Like, if I ask these questions, I mean, am I allowed to change my mind after? Like, is this going to be something that I have to be stuck with, like this answer, and I don't know if this other person is going to think that I'm not allowed to change my mind after? So I think the underlying idea is that in any kind of relationship, you want to feel very comfortable talking about anything. Because if you are, and you're not worried that the other person is going to judge you or go and gossip about you or say mean things behind your back about what your ideas are, then you're going to feel comfortable almost having that trust that if I tell you something that's important about me, I don't want you to maybe go and tell everybody, because maybe it's something I feel that I can trust to maybe just talk about you with it. And it's not really a secret, but it's almost like maybe if it's something that's important about me, I get to choose who I talk to about it, right? So in that way, you understand slowly all the things that are important to maintain a friendship. And then what makes a friendship a deep friendship, which means it's a friendship that has so much trust that people know that you're not trying to hurt me and I'm not trying to hurt you. And if we do by accident do that, we're going to hope that it was like an honest mistake and there's a way that we can kind of repair maybe some of the mistakes and then try again. So I'm going to leave it there because this is a big topic. I don't want to add too much dimension or too many ideas into it, just to kind of understand that that is the nature of a relationship. It evolves very, very slowly and it takes time. And some of these conservative or traditional families sometimes aren't sure how to allow for that. So it's almost like you've met for a month or 2 months or 3 months and now let's get married. And then they just expect life to be really easy for them after that, and for them to know everything about life that they needed to know. It's like, people can be married for 70 years and they're still learning things about each other. And that's the nature of life, because life never stays the same. Life is always changing. And as it's changing, we're also learning like all the different ways that our minds are changing with the way circumstances and the context is changing around us. So I'll leave that there and we'll continue next time.